These two twins just collided for the first time. A true heavyweight clash that didn't just live up to the hype, it reshaped the entire landscape of college football. When Marcus and Jalen Knox finally faced off, nobody really knew what to expect. For 4 full quarters, the two traded blows, but in the end, it was Marcus who showed the country exactly how dominant he'd become. Alabama handled business in Nashville and never really let their foot off the gas. Marcus, the consensus #1 player in the nation, led Alabama to a 13-1 record and a national championship appearance, the very stage he'd been chasing his entire life. Jaylen, meanwhile, took the loss to his brother on the chin and kept grinding. Analysts started calling him the toughest back in the SEC, and by the time the season wrapped, he realized something. He was ready to stop running from the shadow, ready to finally play alongside his brother. But when Marcus fell short in the national championship, all the planning and all the dreaming went out the window. What's up guys, Silver here. Welcome to the finale of the Knox Twins saga. If you've been enjoying the series, leave a like, and if you're new, go ahead and subscribe. It helps me out a ton, and yeah, just enjoy the video. Jaylen gave Marcus space. He knew what that game meant to him, and losing it couldn't have been easy. He figured in some time that Marcus would come to his senses and that this whole "I'm going back to Bama" thing was just a knee-jerk reaction to a tough loss. Eventually, he'd cool off. But weeks passed and nothing, not even a text. The two had always trained together in the offseason, always. So this radio silence, yeah, that wasn't normal. So Jaylen swallowed his pride and picked up the phone. "If you're serious about staying, then I'll transfer to Bama. I can help you finish this thing." Marcus's response came quick, and the sharpness of his words caught Jaylen by surprise. "Jay, you know I'd want that, but this locker room is different, something you've never experienced. We already have our guy at RB, and coach doesn't mess with the rotation. I can't risk it." Those words hit Jaylen like a knife. "Risk what exactly? Playing with your brother?" Marcus took a long pause, mulling over what to say. "You don't get it, Jay. This isn't about us anymore." "You're right, Marcus. As usual, it's all about you." The line went dead and the twins haven't spoken since. Just like that, Jalen's entire senior year plan went up in flames, and with rosters filling quickly, he had to make a decision and fast. He knew he couldn't go back to Vanderbilt. He had outgrown that program. For a second, he considered transferring to Alabama anyway, just to spite Marcus, but with things the way they were, he couldn't stomach the idea of sharing a locker room with him. Prior to now, every time he envisioned his senior year, Marcus was there alongside him. But now, he had a new motivation. Be the best damn running back in the country. With limited options and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Pacific Northwest, Jaylen found his new home. In the Big Ten, Jalen Knox was off to Washington. The moment he touched down in Seattle, coach made it very clear. What he did at Vanderbilt didn't matter here. The stats, the records, the reputation, none of it. If he wanted RB1, he'd have to earn it. And honestly, Jaylen welcomed that. He had always been better when he had something to prove. By the end of his first practice, coach had seen enough. Jaylen was the new RB1 for the Huskies. Jaylen entered senior year as an 84 overall, pissed off and ready to run through the Big Ten. And before long, his first victim had arrived. As Jaylen took the field for the season opener, there was a hollow feeling in his chest, but it was buried beneath a whole lot of anger, and against Boise State, he saw Marcus's face under the helmet of every Bronco. Washington opened the year ranked 15th in the nation, hungry for a deep run, led by their flashy new back. Jaylen took a screen pass, followed his blocks, and walked into the end zone for the first score of the season. Early on, Jaylen was being given the full bell cow treatment, and he hadn't ripped off a home run yet, but he didn't need to. Off the play fake, Jaylen threw a block, and his QB fired a rope down the seam, 60 yards straight to the end zone for a touchdown. Pair that with him finally breaking loose for his longest run of the day, and yeah, Washington could be a problem this year. Jaylen wasn't just running angry, crashing into defenders like a freight train. He was doing more than that. Every carry felt personal. He was playing with a determination so strong, nothing could stop him. A couple of touchdowns and one dominant win later, it didn't take long for Jaylen to earn his first national recognition of the new season. The early Heisman whispers were already beginning to circulate, and as the headlines rolled in, Jaylen's first thought was simple: choke on that, Marcus. Meanwhile, down in Tuscaloosa, Marcus was preparing for his own revenge tour. He hated how he left things with Jaylen, and he even reached for the phone a few times, but he couldn't let himself get distracted, not with a greater mission at hand. For Alabama, it was national championship or bust. He spent the offseason pushing himself harder than ever before, practically living in the facility. When the season arrived, Marcus didn't even look like the same player, and he knew if Alabama was going to avoid another heartbreak, something had to change. And after practice one day, he stepped into Coach Sweeney's office. "Coach, I need to have more of an impact. I've thought about it, and I want to be on the edge this year." At first, Coach Sweeney laughed. Moving the best defender in the country out of the position he dominated for 3 years sounded insane. Then he stopped laughing and gave it a second thought, unless it was to put him even closer to the quarterback. By the time the conversation ended, Marcus had his answer. For senior year, he was Alabama's newest edge rusher. But there would be no time to ease into the new position, because right out of the gate, Bama was on the road to take on Notre Dame. Alabama was entering the season ranked higher than they'd ever been to start the year, and from the very first snap, once the Irish saw Marcus lined up on the edge, the quarterback quickly audibled to a run the other way. Early on, Marcus's inexperience at edge showed. He shot into the backfield but grabbed the wrong man on a read option. He thought if he could attack the handoff early enough, it didn't matter who had the ball, but it was pulled quick and Notre Dame was gone for an 80-yard touchdown run. Coach Sweeney knew this change was bound to be accompanied by some growing pains, and he wasn't ready to pull the plug on this thing just yet. On the very next drive, Marcus responded. He powered through the tackle and chased down the quarterback for his first sack of senior year. He lined back up and immediately split a double team on the next play for back-to-back sacks. Just like that, the nation saw what Marcus Knox could become at this new position. Fast forward to the third quarter, Bama was clinging to a 3-point lead and needed something big from the defense. So Marcus delivered. He shed a block and blew up a run, forcing a fumble. Crimson Tide ball. You could say Marcus looked like a natural at the position, and even when Notre Dame pulled a guard his way, he was just too quick, teleporting into the backfield to blow up another play. But late in the fourth quarter, with Bama up by 2, his inexperience came back at the worst time. He failed to set the edge, Notre Dame escaped contain, and scrambled in for a touchdown and the lead. And by the time he got back out there, the Irish figured out just how to neutralize him. Quick throws and exploiting the secondary to tack on another score. The damage was done, and before long, Alabama had fallen to 0-1 in what was supposed to be their revenge season. Staring at the scoreboard, Marcus was furious. He demanded perfection from his teammates and most of all from himself. And normally this is where he'd pick up the phone to Jaylen, lean on his brother for some pick-me-up words, but that wasn't going to happen. Marcus didn't need encouragement, he just needed the next opponent. Coaches made sure their best player kept his head held high, and just when it felt like nothing would take his mind off the loss, Gatorade came calling with an offer Marcus couldn't refuse. With one stroke of a pen, Marcus Knox made NIL history, becoming the highest paid collegiate athlete of all time. Gatorade got their new poster athlete, and there's even talks of Marcus getting his own flavor, so be on the lookout for that. But still, with no one around to share it all with, it was right back to work. Week 2 was a must-win game, and thankfully, it was only Central Michigan. The perfect opportunity to get this whole pass rush thing down. This time around, Marcus stayed disciplined. He didn't bite on anything, and it paid off early. Coach even had a light bulb moment, situationally flipping him back to middle linebacker, and suddenly, Central Michigan had no idea what to do. He dominated like he never left, but when he got to do what he really wanted to, we saw a new level of domination. Marcus came through with a sack, and then another, getting to the QB on back-to-back plays. Alabama took care of business, moved to 1-1, and didn't slow down against Oklahoma State. Marcus's elite combination of speed and power was on full display early, bullying every tackle unlucky enough to line up across from him. He was on his way to another rush when the QB fired it quick and the receiver slipped one tackle, then another, and then snatched a pair of ankles on his way to the end zone. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that might just be the most miserable play I've ever seen. Marcus knew he couldn't rely on the people behind him to make the plays, not today. So in the fourth quarter, he turned it up and got to the QB in a hurry for a sack. OSU rushed back to the line, fighting against the clock, but Marcus wanted more. Make that 3 sacks on the day for Marcus Knox and another win for Alabama. Meanwhile, over in Seattle, Jaylen couldn't escape Marcus's face. His highlights were playing everywhere. ESPN, TikTok, YouTube, literally everywhere. The nation loved him, and to Jaylen, every highlight was just another reminder of what he wasn't a part of anymore. Jaylen knew his brother was moving different this year, but if that natty loss had unleashed something in Marcus, it had done the same to him. Against number 23 ranked Tennessee, the Vols were determined not to let him run away with things. They buckled down, and early on, Jaylen was barely averaging 2 yards a carry. It wasn't exactly a recipe for success, but Jaylen wanted this competition. Adjustments were made, and the Husky offense started to find a rhythm. Jaylen took a handoff and went untouched for Washington's first score of the day. And then in the second quarter, he'd give Knoxville a whole new meaning, taking a handoff and going 39 yards to the house for another touchdown. And if you've been following along, seeing Jaylen get in the end zone wasn't anything new. What was new was watching his quarterback drop 60-yard dimes to the back of the end zone. Just a few weeks into the season, and Washington was already making their case for the best offense in the nation. Jaylen printed out another Heisman-level performance, forcing the country to share some of that spotlight Marcus had been hogging. And once the nation had Jaylen in their sights, he never left them. Every week, analysts found themselves asking, what more can this kid do? And every week, Jaylen found a way to answer. Whether it was taking over in the receiving game or gliding through blocks like prime Le'Veon Bell, the production never slowed. The Huskies kept climbing, looking every bit like true contenders in the Big Ten. For the Twins, weeks were flying by, and while the wins stacked up, the absence of the bond they once shared started to weigh on both of them. Neither was willing to give an inch, and eventually their father, Elijah, decided it was time to step in. So you boys really aren't talking, after everything you've been through. Dad, I don't want to get into it. I tried explaining it to him. He just doesn't get that this is something I have to do. I hear you, son, but he's your brother. You can't forget that. I know, but he just left. Like all the plans we made just meant nothing, and I'm supposed to be okay with that? Both twins were standing firm, refusing to budge. And if they wouldn't communicate face to face, then the football field became the next best place to do it. With every passing week, headlines followed the twins. The media knew they were at odds, and they loved pouring gasoline on the fire. Jaylen would explode with with monster performances, earth-shattering runs, multiple touchdowns, and the broadcast would immediately cut to Marcus responding with sacks and game-changing plays of his own. Alabama and Washington were both red hot, and before long, the country was locked into a two-man Heisman race, with whispers growing louder that maybe, just maybe, the trophy would have to be shared for the first time ever. Marcus and the Tide handled a Jalen-less Vanderbilt team, and by this point, multiple sacks and TFLs felt routine, but when Marcus got back to his locker, reporters were already waiting.
Great win out there, Marcus. Question for you. You and your brother used to talk about going pro together. Is that still something you want?
Look, Jalen's a great player, and I'd love nothing more, but honestly, it's not on my mind, at least not right now. If it happens, it happens. My focus is getting Alabama back to the national championship. And he meant it. Marcus wasn't slowing down. LSU would try to, sticking him with double teams all afternoon, but Marcus eventually sealed the game anyway. It wasn't pretty, but Alabama just kept stacking wins and started to feel like a team of destiny. They moved to 6-1, and then came Missouri. That was the day Marcus catapulted himself to the top of the Heisman conversation. He opened the day by putting the tackle in a spin cycle, and even when the back bounced outside, he'd still get there to stop the play short. Once Alabama had built a lead, Marcus went hunting. His first sack came easy, then another, and by the end of the night, he didn't have 1, 2, or even 3. He had 4 total sacks. Scouts were throwing out comparisons like James Harrison, and for the first time, it didn't feel like just hype. The Crimson Tide were on a warpath, beating down teams each and every week, and with senior year already more than halfway through, Marcus finally decided this feud had gone on long enough. So he pulled out his phone and shot off a quick text to Jaylen, hoping his brother would feel the same way. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Jaylen wasn't anywhere close to letting it go. In fact, for Jaylen, the tension was quickly approaching a boiling point. He'd watched Marcus shatter the NIL market, he'd watched him creep ahead in the Heisman race, and the question began to grow in his mind. Could anything be just his? Washington was rolling, but the anger that fueled Jaylen on Saturdays was starting to spill into the rest of the week. His fuse became shorter, he snapped at teammates when the ball didn't come his way, looked for contact even when he didn't need to, and chirped at defenders after nearly every play. Even his academics had taken a back seat. He was flirting with full-blown locker room cancer status, but as long as he kept producing on the field, coaches were willing to look the other way. For now. After a gritty win over Illinois where Jaylen carried a load again, the Huskies cracked into the top 5 for the first time all season, and when he walked back into the locker room riding that high, he was surprised to see a text from Marcus waiting for him. Jaylen stared at the message for a long time. A lot of his anger came from the fact that Marcus wasn't even reaching out, and now here he was, finally trying. For a second, Jaylen felt the anger soften. Maybe things didn't have to stay like this. But as he started to type, a new alert came across his screen. College star Marcus Knox has no interest in going pro with brother Jaylen.
You and your brother used to talk about going pro together. Is that still something you want?
Honestly, not right now. If it happens, it happens. My focus is getting Alabama back to the national championship. Jaylen's blood boiled. When he looked back at the text, it didn't feel sincere anymore, and his thumbs moved before his better judgment could stop him. If it happens, it happens. Right now, I'm taking Washington to the national championship. That boiling point we talked about? Yeah, this was it. He hit practice that week with a different kind of intensity, and coaches could see it, a fire burning hotter than ever. Everyone just hoped he'd aim it at the right target. Unfortunately, for number 2 ranked Michigan, they were next. 2 top 5 teams, a heavyweight matchup sure to have playoff implications. There was no room for weakness. On Jalen's first carry, he was swallowed up instantly, but he popped right back up, and on the very next snap, ripped off a 40-yard run to put the Huskies deep into Wolverine territory. But after that, Michigan tightened down, and even though Jaylen would try to get involved by any means necessary, the defense just wasn't letting that happen. Washington was forced to settle for 3, and suddenly, the nation's #1 offense looked human. The ground game was going nowhere, passes were off target, and now the doubt began to creep in. For a moment, Jaylen wondered if they'd been fooling themselves all this time. Maybe they weren't built for this level. The defense kept Washington in the fight, and in the second half, Jaylen took matters into his own hands. When the play calls weren't working, he decided to improvise. He found space in the passing game and dragged the offense back into striking distance. And once Michigan adjusted, it opened the door for a huge touchdown strike that put Washington in front. But the real MVP of this game, the Husky defense, stepped up, turning over Michigan in the red zone, and here they were, staring down an opportunity to really establish a lead. Another strike from the QB did just that, and in the blink of an eye, Washington stretched the lead to 2 scores. But even though the scoreboard looked nice, Jaylen couldn't shake the feeling. He had struggled today, and with a Heisman trophy still in his sights, he was determined not to leave Ann Arbor without at least one play for voters to hang their hat on. And with 1 minute to play, Jaylen lined up for one more carry. He burst straight up the middle into open space, and with 2 Wolverines closing in, somehow he broke free of both of them, and from there, no one could touch him. Washington walked out of Michigan with a statement win, silencing any doubters out there that said they weren't a true contender. The locker room was electric, and confidence was through the roof. Everything was trending upward, until the phone rang. Ineligible? What do you mean I'm ineligible? I'm sorry, Jaylen. I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but you've let your classes slip. You know the rule. Football comes second. Jaylen just stood there, speechless. First came anger, then disbelief, and then that sinking feeling in his chest. He pleaded with coaches, with advisors, but it didn't matter. This was his new reality. He'd been so consumed with winning, with chasing the Heisman, and proving something to Marcus that everything else fell to the side. Missed assignments, skipped classes, all in the interest of football. Jaylen had told himself it was nothing to worry about, but the truth is, it was far worse than he could have imagined. And now the frontrunner for college football's biggest award was sidelined. For Washington's shot at a Big Ten title, this was devastating, and for his Heisman campaign, it felt like a death sentence. The news didn't stay quiet for long, and when it finally broke, the media had a field day.
2 games in November. When you're the
How
Heisman
irresponsible
frontrunner,
can you be?
that
It's
is
not
a
an injury.
self-inflicted wound I can't wrap my head
How
around.
irresponsible can you be? It's not an injury. It's not bad luck. It's showing up, doing the work in the classroom. That's the deal.
Every outlet ran the story, each headline twisting the knife a little deeper. News of Jaylen's suspension spread like wildfire, and when it reached Tuscaloosa, Marcus was floored. Bama's locker room went wild, and every teammate congratulated him on a free path to the Heisman, but Marcus wasn't exactly celebrating. Suddenly, for the first time all year, football felt small. He didn't feel like the nation's best player. He felt like a brother watching the other half of himself fall apart. He wanted to check in on Jaylen, but he also had a job to do. Alabama was chasing perfection, and the season wouldn't slow down for anyone. When the Tide traveled to take on South Carolina, Marcus was moving like a man on a mission. He had officially reached elite edge rusher status, and after a quick sack to open the game, Marcus was in search for another. Only this time, he was in the right place at just the right time. His teammate brings down the quarterback, the ball popped out, and off pure instinct, Marcus scooped it up and took off straight towards the end zone. In 4 years, it felt like the only thing he hadn't done was score a touchdown. He'd come close, but it never happened. Until now. Nothing was going to stop him as he walked into the end zone for his first ever collegiate touchdown. And even on the road, Heisman chants echoed throughout the stadium. The nation had never seen a defender dominate quite like this, and he wouldn't stop there. He secured yet another sack, and then one more for good measure, this time knocking the ball out in the process. By the end of the night, Alabama rolled to another win, and Marcus Knox stood alone at the top of the Heisman race. Meanwhile, up in Seattle, Jaylen was sitting on the couch watching it all unfold. He watched Marcus dominate, watched the entire country cheer for him, and watched his own team fall to Oregon without him. Sitting alone in his dorm, he pulled out his phone and read Marcus's text again, the one he still hadn't answered. And for the first time all season, a new feeling crept in. He started to wonder if he'd been the one getting in his own way. All this time, he'd been chasing vengeance, trying to prove he didn't need his brother, while simultaneously blaming him for everything. But what had it actually gotten him? A suspension, a losing team, and a season slipping through his fingers. The next 2 weeks felt like an eternity. The nation stopped talking about him altogether, and college football kept moving along like he never existed. When his suspension was finally served and the spotlight had faded, Jaylen did something he hadn't done all year. He looked in the mirror, and for the first time, he didn't recognize the person staring back. Something had to change. He couldn't undo what happened, and he couldn't forgive Marcus overnight, but at the end of the day, brothers are brothers. With Washington's season hanging in the balance and Ohio State coming to town, it was finally time for Jaylen to return to the field and remind everyone who he was. Who he really was. His name had completely fallen off the Heisman ballot, but that didn't matter to him anymore. This time, it wasn't about headlines or proving a point, he just wanted to help his team. His first handoff went nowhere. His second, more of the same. There was rust for sure, but the real question was how quickly could he shake it off? The first drive stalled, but when Washington's defense gifted the offense incredible field position, Jaylen saw his opportunity. He bounced outside, spotted the smallest crease, and slipped through it and found the end zone. It wasn't spectacular, but it was a start. On the next drive, something felt different, lighter. Once he let go of the anger he'd been carrying around for months, it was like the shackles came off. He wasn't forcing anything anymore, he was just playing. He moved the offense methodically down the field, and when they reached the red zone, coach kept the ball in his hands. Jaylen took the handoff and powered his way in for his second score of the afternoon. His comeback was unfolding in real time, the kind of return you could only script in a movie. Washington secured a massive win, reviving their postseason hopes, and Jaylen reminded the nation exactly who he was. But he didn't stop there. Against Northwestern, he would put together a highlight reel that would make even Tavon Austin jealous, all in a single half of football. With the season winding down, he was making it impossible for Heisman voters to ignore him. He became impossible to define. A player who carried his team through the first half of the season, fell apart under his own ego, served a 2-game suspension, and came back playing more electric than ever. What do you even do with a player like that? Washington was alive again, but what no one saw coming was what was happening in Tuscaloosa. Marcus was still dominating defensively, still living in backfields and blowing up plays, but suddenly the margins were shrinking. What started as blowouts every single week turned into nail-biters, but that was only the beginning. Against Oklahoma, the defense completely unraveled, and it wasn't because of number 44. Marcus opened with a sack and later chased down a touchdown-saving tackle, but as he knows all too well, he can't do everything. The Sooners kept finding the end zone, and it felt like if Marcus wasn't in the backfield on top of the QB in an instant, no one else knew what to do. Alabama found themselves down 2 scores in the fourth quarter, but Marcus refused to just hand the game over. He spun off a block, drilled the running back, and forced a fumble. Unfortunately, the Tide couldn't recover, and on the very next play, what do you know, it's an Oklahoma touchdown. Bama's offense was missing all night, and by the final whistle, Oklahoma handed Alabama their second loss of the season. An absolutely miserable showing from everyone not named Marcus Knox. Needless to say, Marcus was furious, and after one of the most embarrassing losses in recent memory, the entire locker room turned to him looking for guidance. Marcus stood up and delivered a speech that would rival Spencer James himself.
It was one of ours!
Marcus spoke about responsibility, about doing your job for the man next to you, and about pride. With one regular season game left and their postseason hopes hanging by a thread, everything came down to Auburn. The defense held firm, locking down Auburn for most of the game, but through 3 quarters, Alabama had only managed a field goal. Marcus kept his unit steady, trusting the offense would finally wake up, and they did, doing just enough to force overtime. Auburn struck first, and thankfully Bama would respond, and from there it was 2-point conversions only. Auburn came out in empty, and Marcus knew exactly what was coming. At the snap, he shot downhill untouched, exploding into the backfield and dragging down the quarterback in an instant. Marcus Knox had just single-handedly saved Alabama's season. With the regular season finally at a close, both twins stood on opposite sides of the country, battered, tested, but still very much alive. Conference title week had arrived, and soon after that, the playoffs. Marcus had led Alabama to a second straight SEC championship appearance, and as he prepared for the game, he received a text from Jaylen. Marcus smiled as he read it. One text wasn't magically going to repair their fractured relationship, but it was a sign that maybe the ice between them was finally starting to thaw. But I'll tell you where the ice wasn't thawing, in Marcus's veins. As he took the field, the weight of the moment didn't seem to face him. Last year, everything about the postseason had been brand new, but this time around, he was ready for it. And to Marcus, anything short of a national championship was a failure. Georgia came out fighting, determined to make things interesting. Marcus struggled to get involved early, and the Bulldogs were able to slowly march down the field, wearing out the defense before finally punching it into the end zone for the game's first points. And with Bama failing to answer with 7 of their own, Marcus knew it was up to him to change the momentum. Back on the field, he flew into the backfield and buried the quarterback for his first sack of the day. The defense kept Georgia on their toes, and Bama's offense finally began to find a rhythm. Marcus was feeling unstoppable, but his dominance wouldn't end there. In the fourth quarter, Georgia held the lead, but Marcus tracked the ball carrier, crashed downhill, and laid the hammer. The hit jarred the ball loose, and Marcus fell on the fumble himself, giving Alabama the life they desperately needed. The stadium erupted, and we're getting the full Marcus Knox experience in the SEC championship. His turnover turned into points, forcing the game into overtime, where Marcus was more than ready to finish the job. Off the snap, he beat the tackle on an inside move and buried the quarterback yet again, sealing the game. For the second straight year, Alabama locked up the SEC title off the back of a generational performance from the best defensive player in the country. The Tide celebrated on the field, and Marcus cracked a smile, but nothing more. With a first-round bye secured, all attention shifted to Seattle, where the Stars had aligned and paved the way for Jaylen and Washington to make their own conference title appearance. What had recently looked like a doomed season was suddenly alive again, and this time Jaylen was determined not to waste it. As the Huskies prepared to take on USC in the Big Ten Championship, Jaylen received his own good luck text. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the twins felt a little like brothers again. To Jaylen, it meant everything, and it gave him just the confidence boost he needed heading into his first conference championship game. As he took the field, the butterflies in his stomach were flipping all over the place. He knew exactly what was on the line today. His own legacy. He refused to be the Knox who fell short. The number 2 ranked Trojan struck first, putting up 3 points, and now it was Washington's turn to respond. Jaylen's number was called immediately, and on his first handoff, he spotted a crease and didn't hesitate, bursting through the hole, and he raced forward for a 45-yard gain. The stadium shook, and as the crowd began chanting his name, the nerves disappeared. The game was on. After that first carry, the Trojans buckled down, forcing Jaylen to fight for every yard he earned. A few plays later, he slipped out of the backfield, snagged a quick dump-off pass, and dragged 2 defenders into the end zone for Washington's first touchdown of the game. But from that point forward, the game slowed down. Running lanes became harder and harder to find, and Washington struggled to consistently move the ball. It was obvious the Trojans had done their homework. They knew exactly how to slow down number 6. They keyed on every handoff and blanketed him on every route out of the backfield. Jaylen knew this was going to be a battle, but even he was surprised. This was tougher than anything he'd faced before. USC extended their lead late in the fourth quarter, and with just 3 minutes remaining, Washington trailed by 10. Jaylen took the field knowing the offense needed something fast. He took a handoff up the middle, bounced outside, and raced out of bounds to stop the clock. With just over 2 minutes to play, the coach dialed up another run, a gutsy call, and Jaylen had to make the most of it. After struggling to find space all day, he took the handoff back up the middle, read his blocks, and hit the edge. Not a single Trojan had the angle, and Jalen Knox walked untouched into the end zone. The deficit was now down to 3. All Washington needed was one stop. They didn't get it. Jaylen finished his day with 170 yards and 2 touchdowns, but it wasn't enough. Washington had lost the Big Ten championship, suffering a critical blow to their playoff hopes, and all Jaylen could do now was hope the college football committee had seen enough to give them a chance. But finding out their decision would have to wait, because now the moment both twins had been waiting for had finally arrived. Marcus and Jaylen received their invitations, put on their suits red and purple, and headed to New York City. It was time for the Heisman ceremony. When the two arrived at Lincoln Center, it was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. They were used to stadiums packed with screaming fans, but here it was different. Cameras flashing everywhere, reporters swarming the red carpet, the entire scene felt surreal. Marcus and Jaylen eventually found one another among the sea of paparazzi and awkwardly embraced. They hadn't spoken face to face in months, and somehow in that moment, neither of them really knew what to say. But before long, the two were seated and the ceremony began. The nation knew it would come down to these two, but no one truly knew which way it would swing. Marcus Knox had become college football's ultimate defender, a one-man wrecking crew. Sacks, tackles for loss, even defensive touchdowns. He was the engine behind Alabama's push for back-to-back national title appearances. And Jaylen, he had gone from being known as Marcus's brother to the best running back in the country. From bursting onto the scene at Vanderbilt to dominating at Washington, where he elevated his game to a level no one thought possible. His rise in college football wasn't dumb luck, it was long overdue. As the twins shared the stage waiting for the announcement, years of backyard battles and late-night practice sessions flashed through both of their minds.
And the Heisman Memorial Trophy goes to Jalen Knox, University of Washington.
It could have gone either way, and plenty would argue that Marcus had been robbed, but nobody could deny it. Jalen Knox had earned this moment. As the applause roared through the room, Jaylen stood there stunned. For a kid who had spent his whole life living in someone else's shadow, finally stepping into the spotlight felt almost unreal. He looked over at Marcus, who was smiling, clapping, and even pulling him in for a hug. Jaylen stepped up to the podium, and as the cheers slowly settled, he began to speak. Wow, I don't really know what to say other than I'm honored. I want to thank my coaches, my teammates, my father, and my brother Marcus. It's been a crazy season. Marcus watched his brother standing at the podium beaming with pride. Marcus was smiling, but behind the grin, something else was beginning to grow. A fire. Not of jealousy, but the truth. Marcus was proud of his brother, he really was, but he couldn't ignore what the nation had just told him. For the very first time, Jalen Knox was the better twin. I just want to say thank you and go Huskies. As the ceremony ended and the twins made their way out, they shared one final goodbye, because both of them knew their story wasn't finished, not yet. For the nation's newest Heisman winner, the good news continued rolling in. Despite losing in the Big Ten championship, the nation wanted to see more of Jalen Knox. Washington had done just enough to sneak into one of the final playoff spots, drawing a matchup against the Texas Longhorns in the first round. And even though they were playing this one at home, as Jaylen took the field, he could feel the energy in the air. It was different. He was stepping into uncharted territory. He'd been to plenty of playoff games before, but only in the stands cheering Marcus on. Now it was his turn to make history. Coming off the biggest award in college football, the Longhorns knew exactly who to target. They keyed on Jalen's every carry, making it nearly impossible for Washington to get anything going. Drive after drive stalled out, but the thing about Jaylen is that you can only keep him down for so long. Sooner or later, he breaks through. At the goal line, the quarterback floated a pass to the flats, Jaylen secured it and tightrope the sideline, slipping into the end zone for the first points of the game. And from that moment on, every yard he gained was hard fought. Jaylen was getting hit again and again, and coach was ready to take him out for a series or two, not wanting to burn out his best weapon in the very first round, but Jaylen refused. He'd rest when the job was finished. Right before halftime, he split out wide and delivered a monster block, paving the way for another Husky touchdown. Texas finally got on the board and cut the lead close, and in the fourth quarter, with the game hanging in the balance, Jaylen lined up out wide once again. Off the snap, he immediately recognized the zone coverage and raced toward the opening, throwing his hand up as he ripped up the seam. The quarterback hit him in stride, and Jaylen walked into the end zone on a miraculous play. The stadium erupted, cheers pouring down even harder than the rain. In Jalen's very first playoff game, Washington wrangled the Longhorns and proved to everyone they belonged here. After the win, the locker room was chaos, and somewhere in the celebration, Jaylen picked up his phone and fired off a quick text to his brother. Marcus, meanwhile, was lacing up for his own playoff run. He'd been seeing the waves Jaylen was making in Seattle, and for the first time in his life, Marcus saw his twin in a completely different way. Jaylen wasn't just his brother anymore, and he wasn't just another member of the Knox family to pick up a football, he was a threat. Marcus didn't respond respond to the text. The playoffs brought out a different kind of animal in him, and now was no time for distractions. He was still the same terrifying force he'd been all year, but now there was a new level of focus behind it. Marcus had been here before, and for him, there were no nerves, only unfinished business. Alabama opened the day strong, and Marcus wasted no time making his presence felt. Blowing past the tackle, he buried the quarterback for a sack that by this point felt almost routine. The Tide jumped out to a lead, but Penn State wasn't going down quietly. Late in the third quarter, clinging to only a 3-point advantage, Marcus came through with one of the most awkward TFLs you'll ever see. But hey, we'll take it. Alabama looked strong, but with only 2 minutes left and the lead sitting at 6, letting up a touchdown could end their season. And Penn State was chunking their way down the field, looking like they might do exactly that. Marcus did everything he could to hold the line, building a wall on the defense. He shed a block for another tackle for loss, trying to stop the Lions in their tracks, and moments later he came flying across the field for what might have been a touchdown-saving tackle. But with 50 seconds left, Penn State stood at the goal line, knocking at the door. The Lions lofted a pass over Marcus's head, and it's picked off by Alabama. That is the ball game. Alabama survived the thriller, and Marcus Knox marched on, keeping his mission of redemption very much alive. It wasn't pretty, but at this stage in the season, victory rarely is. After the game, Jaylen reached out again to congratulate him, and strangely, that text went unanswered too. Marcus stared down at the messages on his phone. He knew he should respond, but he also knew that maybe he shouldn't. The weeks following what had become the closest Heisman vote in history left the nation divided. One half believed Jaylen was the obvious choice, and the other insisted Marcus had been robbed. Marcus tried to ignore the noise, but the truth was, losing college football's biggest award to Jaylen stung. He couldn't stand seeing that trophy in someone else's hands, even if those hands were his brother's. And staying silent was the only way to keep himself from saying what he really felt, that the Heisman should have been his. Suddenly, Marcus's phone rang. It was Jaylen. "Are you avoiding me or something?" Jaylen asked. "You haven't said a word since the ceremony. I thought we put everything from this year behind us." Marcus didn't respond. "I can hear you breathing, genius." Marcus sighed. "Look, Jay, I'm sorry. I just think we should be focused on ourselves right now, our teams." "That doesn't mean you—" "This is the playoffs, Jaylen," Marcus interrupted. "It's hard to get here, and it's even harder to keep going. That's where my mind is right now. It has to be." Jaylen was taken aback by the directness. Yeah, I guess you're right. It's nothing personal. It's just football." For the first time in his life, Jaylen hardly recognized his brother. Marcus's voice wasn't cold, just stern. He was one game away from returning to the national championship, the game that had haunted him all season long. Every Saturday, the loss replayed in his head, and he wasn't about to let anything stop him from finishing the job. Not this time. And standing in his way was Ohio State, a team Marcus knew all too well. And as it turned out, they knew him too. The Buckeyes double-teamed Marcus on nearly every snap, effectively erasing him from the game. But thankfully, Alabama's offense came ready to play, jumping out to an early lead. But nothing in the playoffs is ever easy. Ohio State struck once with a deep play, then again with a short run, and suddenly the Buckeyes were right back in it. Coming out of halftime, Coach got creative, moving Marcus around the defense, and when he did, Marcus came flying downhill for a massive tackle for loss. He lined up on the edge of the very next play, won inside, and dropped the quarterback for a sack. But even after two huge plays killed Ohio State's drive, Marcus stormed to the sideline furious. He didn't just want impact, he wanted domination. And on the next drive, he got it. Reading the play action perfectly, Marcus smothered the quarterback deep in the backfield. The nation's best defender was alive and well, and from that moment on, he lived behind the line of scrimmage, collapsing the pocket and forcing hurried throws all game long. Ohio State would score late, but by then, it was far too little and far too late. Marcus Knox and Alabama were headed back to the national championship. In the locker room, the team celebrated wildly, but Marcus didn't join in. Instead, he sat quietly by his locker, staring around the room. There was nothing to celebrate. He hadn't won anything yet. Alabama fighting their way back to the Natty felt inevitable, especially with Marcus playing the way he had all year. But on the other side of the country, the Heisman winner was trying to carry his team the distance too. Washington was deep into the playoffs, and things weren't going to slow down. In their quarterfinal matchup, Jaylen was quickly learning just how different playoff football really was. Duke was playing faster and hitting harder than just about any team he'd faced all year. On their first drive, Washington faced a 3rd and long, and Jaylen knew he needed to rise to the challenge. He took a screen pass, got 2 massive blocks from his linemen, and snaked his way through traffic for a huge first down to keep the chains moving. And soon after, the Huskies got on the board with a play-action fake and a strike to the end zone. Duke responded right away, but Jaylen wasn't fazed. He took another screen pass, this time surging forward for a 35-yard pickup that moved Washington across midfield. Jaylen knew that going against an offense like the Blue Devils, every drive needed to end in points, and even though the defense was making him fight for every yard, it was only a matter of time before he punched in his first score of the game. And yeah, I guess you could say his playoff nerves had officially disappeared. And once they did, Heisman Jaylen was unleashed all over the field. Duke couldn't contain him, and even though they came came out of the half with a score to make things interesting, Jaylen was determined to stomp out any hope of a comeback. He ripped off his longest run of the day and only being tracked down after moving Washington back into the red zone. Then, following some beautiful blocks one last time, Jaylen punched in another Husky touchdown, and finally, Duke ran out of gas. Washington continued to pile it on, showing the nation their offense was as strong as ever heading into the semifinal. After the game, the locker room was going crazy, and right in the center of it all was Jaylen. He'd been the driving force behind a Washington team that was now just one game shy of a national championship appearance. But over in Tuscaloosa, Marcus sat watching his own brother win game after game, round after round, looking more formidable every week. And as he tuned into Jaylen's semifinal game, Marcus couldn't help but feel conflicted. Of course he wanted his brother to win, of course he wanted to see him succeed, but why did he really want it? Was it for Jaylen, or so he could get his shot at embarrassing the Heisman winner on the biggest stage imaginable? Meanwhile, as Jaylen took the field, he couldn't help but feel a little bit in awe. This was without a doubt the biggest game of his career, and to think it wasn't that long ago that he was planning what his life might look like without football. He was never supposed to be here, or maybe he was. One game away from a real shot at a national title, and one game away from landing his name among college football's greats. But he couldn't think that far ahead, not with Arkansas determined to punch their own ticket. The first time Jaylen touched the field, Washington was already down 7, and early on the Razorbacks made him look like his high school self again. Every handoff went nowhere, every hit was followed by trash talk, the nation's #1 offense looked broken. In the second quarter, still trailing by 7, Washington desperately needed something to spark them. Jaylen leaked out for a screen with a wide open field in front of him, and the ball bounced right off his hands. In that moment, the thought crept in. Maybe this was it. Maybe the lights were finally too bright. It had been a wild ride, but maybe this is where it all ends. The negative thoughts started piling up, but suddenly a ball hit Jaylen square in the chest, snapping him right back into the moment, and off of pure instinct, he turned upfield, looked around, and realized there wasn't a Razorback within a mile of him. Jaylen walked straight into the end zone for a Husky touchdown, and just like that, the doubt lifted off of his shoulders. They could do this. But one big play wasn't going to win the game. Arkansas clamped down, knowing full well that victory meant containing number 6. With less than a minute before halftime, coach looked ready to jog into the locker room and draw up some adjustments, but when there's a Knox in your backfield, any given carry can turn into a home run. Jaylen followed his blocks to the second level, bounced it outside, and turned on the Jets for a 40-yard touchdown right before halftime. The momentum was finally shifting. Arkansas scored coming out of the break, but Jaylen wasn't sweating it. Then suddenly, the Washington offense sputtered again. A quick 3-and-out led to another Razorback score, and now in the fourth quarter, down 7, Jaylen knew that if they were going to pull this off, it had to come from him. One handoff later, he squeezed through traffic and pushed Washington deep into Arkansas territory, but inside the red zone, Arkansas became a wall, the toughest Jaylen had faced all year. Washington faced a 3rd and forever with 2 minutes left, and Jaylen knew this was it. Getting stopped here meant the end of everything. He motioned out of the backfield and into the slot, and right off the snap, he saw the Razorbacks fall into zone coverage and instantly knew what he needed to do. He burst upfield, threw his hand up, and walked straight into the end zone for the game-tying touchdown. This game wasn't over yet. One defensive stop later, and the semifinal was headed to overtime. Arkansas got the ball first and settled for 3, and as Jaylen ran onto the field, the path to the national championship was suddenly wide open in front of him. One touchdown, that's all it would take. A quick screen set Washington up in prime position, then on 3rd down from the 5, Jaylen leaked out of the backfield and no one covered him. The ball hit his hands in the end zone, and Washington had done it. For the first time ever, Jalen Knox was national championship bound. The stadium exploded and the team was going crazy. Jaylen never wanted to leave that field. After the game, a reporter waiting outside his locker room asked him if this performance might help his Heisman odds. Who's gonna tell him? As the Huskies continued celebrating, Jalen's excitement slowly turned into something else. That sinking feeling, that weight in his stomach. He knew what was waiting for him. The one team, the one player he feared lining up against. And right then, Jalen's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. See you next week. Of all the ways senior year could end, no one could have imagined this. 4 long, brutal seasons of growth, resentment, heartbreak, and headlines had all led to one final game. Alabama versus Washington. Brother versus brother. Twin versus twin for the national championship. The night before kickoff, Jaylen and Marcus both sat alone in their rooms, phone within reach. Each of them thought about reaching out, maybe sending a quick text, cracking a joke like they used to, just to cut through some of the tension for a moment. But neither of them did. As the night dragged on, neither phone rang. Morning came faster than either of them expected, and the day had finally arrived. When the teams arrived at the stadium, the energy was already building. The parking lots were packed, the crowds were roaring, and inside, the entire place felt like it was shaking. Deep inside the stadium, the twins made their way toward the field, and in the tunnel, they crossed paths. No crowds, no cameras, just the echoes of cleats on concrete. Marcus stepped forward first. I never thought it would come to this. Jaylen let out a quiet breath. Yeah, but here we are. For a split second, Marcus's game face cracked, but it came back just as quickly. I'll see you out there. No handshake, no hug, the twins walked past each other without another word, only war in their eyes. Up in the stands, the entire Knox family sat together watching the twins take the field one last time. Washington starts with the ball and the quarterback was feeling pressure immediately. He dumps it off over the middle to Jaylen, who was met by Marcus just short of the first down. The Huskies turn it over and Alabama responds by putting up 3, and the next time Jaylen touches the field, he takes a handoff to the edge and surges forward for a 29-yard pickup. As the crowd roars, Marcus watches his brother, realizing just how far he'd come since their last meeting. Jaylen looks stronger, quicker, and more determined than ever. There was no room for holding back today. Jaylen keeps ripping off chunk gains one after another, driving the Huskies down to the goal line where he reels one in for a touchdown right under Marcus's nose. The nation's top offense takes the lead, and early on, the Heisman winner seems to have the upper hand. Alabama responds with a touchdown of their own, and on the next drive, Marcus was shoving linemen aside just to get within striking distance of his brother. Washington coaches knew they had to scheme away from number 44, but even when they did, Marcus flew across the formation to stop Jaylen short. For the first time in their lives, the two twins looked like equals, exchanging blows, each one carrying the weight of years. Washington faced a 4th and 1 at midfield and decided to roll the dice, but Jaylen is swallowed in the backfield for a turnover on downs. Alabama wastes no time, giving the ball to their own back, who rumbles in for a touchdown to give the Tide a 10-point lead. But despite the deficit, Washington kept feeding the run game. Jaylen hit the edge, made Bama defenders look silly before Marcus flies across the field to finally bring him down. Marcus was feeling in control of this one, and on the next play, Washington dials up a screen pass, the play he had been waiting for. He shot down the line, ready for that familiar stiff arm, but as Jaylen races up the field, he pulls out a move Marcus hasn't seen before, spinning him out of his cleats. The stadium erupts and Heisman chants were pouring down from the stands. With the momentum shifting, Jaylen caught a pass over the middle and spun away from another Bama defender, fighting up to the 2 before Marcus flies in, driving him to the turf from behind. And as they get up, the twins lock eyes, Jaylen smirking slightly and Marcus's eyes burning red. From there, Jaylen punches in his second touchdown of the night, and it was now the game started to get chippy. Every collision just went a little further. Marcus was seeing red everywhere, and the toll of the battle was clear on both of them. Washington tries to air it out to Jaylen, but Marcus is there with perfect one-on-one coverage, leaping into the air to swat it away. Both twins were giving everything out there, and everyone on the field knew these two were battling for more than just a national title. Still down by 3, Washington was looking for points before the half. Jaylen fought hard, trying to will his team into scoring position. The quarterback lofts it up, but Marcus was there waiting like a shark. He picked it off and put Alabama right back in control. Bama tacks on a field goal, extending their lead at halftime, and heading into the break, both twins looked supernatural, and as impressive as Jaylen has been, it was Marcus and Alabama who seemed to have the edge. Coming out of the half, Jaylen was running with more anger than ever. Marcus was in prime position to stop him once again, but Jaylen wasn't having it. By sheer force of will, he was dragging Washington down the field. Catch after catch, and over the middle, he throws up a stiff arm, but Marcus bats it down and drags him to the ground. The Huskies were marching, and once they approached the goal line, Marcus was erased from the play, letting Jaylen walk into the end zone for the score. Washington takes a razor-thin 1-point lead, but it wouldn't last. Alabama answered right back in the 4th quarter, reclaiming the lead. And at this point, Marcus looked unstoppable. Anything Jaylen tried, he was there to shut it down. Bama would extend their lead to 8, and Washington was searching for life late. They lean on their Heisman back, who takes a handoff to the edge, hard cuts back inside, and follows beautiful blocks, racing up the sideline before being chased down at the 2-yard line. A big play like that gives the Huskies the boost they need to finish the drive with another dump off to Jaylen for another score. Then Washington elects to go for 2, and absolutely no one is on Jaylen as he high steps into the end zone. We have a tie game. Alabama's offense comes up empty for what feels like the first time all day, and with 2 minutes left, Washington had a real shot at the win. But here comes Marcus, crushing Jaylen behind the line and following it up with a huge sack, forcing Washington to punt it away. And with just 40 seconds left on the clock, Bama marches down and takes the lead. Down 7, the clock ticking away, Washington needed a miracle. But Jaylen didn't blink. With the weight of the world on his back, he weaved his way through traffic on a huge play to move the offense down inside the 10-yard line. As the seconds continued to fall off the clock, the Huskies lined back up. This was it for the game. They put the ball in the Heisman's hands, and as Jaylen takes the toss, he knew this was it, the last play of his college career. And right there, the years flashed before his eyes, from riding the bench to getting a shot and never looking back. And now, just yards away from finishing it. Marcus reads the pitch and charges forward. Knowing the end was near, he pictured his journey. The wins, the losses, the struggles, the times he and Jaylen grew apart and back together, everything had led to this moment. It's a race to the goal line. As time expires, Marcus meets Jaylen, wrapping him up at the 1-yard line. Alabama wins. The final whistle echoes through the stadium as the crowd erupted. Crimson confetti began to fall from the rafters as both twins remain on the ground, staring up at the lights above them. Jaylen couldn't move. He was stunned. He had just played the game of his life, leaving everything he had on this field, and still, somehow, it wasn't enough. Marcus sees his brother lying there. Instead of celebrating, instead of running toward the sideline with the rest of his team, he picked his brother up. Jay, you played a hell of a game. It could have gone either way, truly. The two brothers embrace with tears of victory and tears of defeat spilling down their faces. And just like that, the rivalry that had defined the last 4 years was over. Still holding Jaylen close, Marcus leans in and says, "You'll always be the Heisman," something he himself could never claim. Jaylen lets out a small chuckle. He pats Marcus on the back and tells him to go celebrate with his team. Marcus nods, gives one last smile, and jogs away, disappearing into the sea of crimson jerseys waiting for him. Jaylen stayed behind a moment longer, looking around the stadium one final time. The lights, the fans, the game he loved. He may not have walked away with the championship, but something about standing on this field and making it this far was all the validation he'd ever need. Jaylen picked up his helmet and began the long walk back toward the locker room. The Knox twins had just gone to war on the biggest stage in college football. Marcus Knox finally captured the redemption he'd been chasing all season long, and Jaylen proved he was every bit the fighter the nation believed he was. But the truth is, neither brother gets here without the other. 4 seasons of battles, 4 seasons of pushing each other further than either thought possible, and when it was all said and done, the final clash didn't just decide a national champion, it cemented one of the greatest brother rivalries the sport had ever seen. Marcus Knox leaves college football with the championship he fought so hard to reclaim, and Jalen Knox walks away as the Heisman winner who carried Washington to the brink of glory. 2 different endings, 2 incredible careers, 1 unforgettable story. The story of the Knox twins. Thanks for watching.